Picture this. Alexander the Great is alone inside an enemy city. He jumped off the siege wall by himself. His men's ladders had collapsed under the rush of soldiers trying to follow him. And now he is surrounded, outnumbered, fighting in a tight corner with his back against a fig tree. An arrow punches through his chest and pierces his lung. He keeps fighting. When his men finally break through the gates and reach him, some of them are weeping. And Alexander, bleeding out, struggling to breathe, looks up at them and smiles. He says, "Let none of you falter, even if it is for my sake. They will not believe I am unafraid of death if you fear for mine." That moment tells you everything you need to know about Alexander the Great. And by the end of this video, you are going to understand the specific psychological force that made him capable of something like that. The same force that drove him to conquer 11,000 miles of the known world before he turned 30, and the same force that put him in his grave at 32. If you appreciate this kind of content, gently tap that like button. Let's get into it. Here is the idea this whole video is built around. The thing that made Alexander unstoppable was not discipline. It was not strategy. It was not even courage in the normal sense. It was a kind of madness, a specific, identifiable psychological wound. And the extraordinary thing is that the wound and the weapon were the same thing. Every trait that historians point to as his flaw, his restlessness, his rage, his belief that he was literally a god, his obsession with a dead hero from a 700-year-old poem, was also the exact reason he could do what no one before or since has ever done. To understand him, you have to start at the beginning. You have to start with a horse. Alexander was around 13 years old when his father, Philip II, king of Macedon, one of the most feared rulers in the ancient world, was shown a black stallion called Bucephalus. The horse was enormous, beautiful, and completely wild. Every rider Philip's men put on it was thrown. The king was about to send it away. Alexander watched all of this and said, "I could ride that horse." The court laughed. Philip told him that if he could not ride it, he would pay the purchase price himself, a fortune for a boy. What Alexander had noticed, what the grown men had missed, was that the horse was terrified of its own shadow. Every time a rider mounted, the shadow moved, the horse panicked, and the rider was thrown. So Alexander turned the horse to face the sun, shadow behind it, no threat visible, and Bucephalus stood still. Plutarch records that Philip watched his son gallop back across the field and wept. Then he said, "My son, seek out a kingdom worthy of yourself, for Macedonia is too small for you." He spent his entire life doing to the world exactly what he did to that horse, turning fear into forward momentum. But here is the part they leave out of the story. The fear he was running from was not some external enemy. It was the fear of being ordinary, the fear of being merely Philip's son and nothing more. When news of his father's battlefield victories reached him as a boy, Alexander's reaction was not pride. According to Plutarch, he told his friends he was worried, because every time Philip won, there would be less left for him to conquer. This was not a healthy child's ambition. This was something deeper and darker, a terror of smallness that would drive him across the entire known world and still not be satisfied. The ancient Greek word for it is Pothos. The historian Arrian uses it again and again to explain the things Alexander did that had no military logic. Crossing the Danube just to prove he could. Marching 300 miles through the desert to consult a distant oracle. pushing east past every rational stopping point into India. Pothos means longing. Specifically, it means a craving for something you do not yet have, an itch that getting what you want does not scratch. The more Alexander conquered, the louder the itch got. He tried to fill it with the one person he believed understood him: Achilles. Alexander slept with a copy of Homer's Iliad under his pillow, personally annotated by Aristotle, who had been his tutor. Beside a dagger, he saw himself as the new Achilles. His best friend and lifelong companion Hephaestion was his Patroclus. When his army first reached Troy at the start of the campaign, Alexander stripped naked, ran a race around the tomb of Achilles, and laid a wreath on it. He envied Achilles, Arrian tells us, because Achilles had Homer to make him immortal. Alexander wanted that. He needed it. He was not just fighting Persia. He was fighting time. He was fighting death. He was fighting the possibility that he might be forgotten. The oracle at Siwa changed everything. Alexander made a 300-mile detour through the Libyan desert, a journey that nearly killed his army, to reach the oracle of Zeus Ammon. When he arrived, the priest greeted him as the son of Zeus. What the priest actually said is lost. But what Alexander told people afterward was that he had received the answer he was looking for. He came back different. He began wearing the ram's horns of Zeus Ammon in his portraits. He expected court rituals reserved for gods. He had already displayed the quality his historians call his divine fearlessness. But now it was theological. He was not just brave, he was untouchable. And you cannot put a ceiling on a man who genuinely believes that. This is the Gordian Knot in miniature. You have heard this story. An ancient prophecy said that whoever untied an impossibly complex knot would rule all of Asia. Alexander looked at it, drew his sword, or in the version Arrian prefers, simply pulled out the pin holding the whole thing together. And the knot fell open. "It makes no difference," he said, "how it is loosed." A man who does not accept that problems have rules is a terrifying opponent. He is also a terrifying friend. Quick break. If you are watching this and you want more content like it, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We go deep on history, philosophy, and the ideas behind the people who shape the world. It costs you nothing, and it means everything for a channel like ours. The killing of Cleitus the Black is the moment the engine turned on itself. Cleitus had personally saved Alexander's life in battle, literally cut off the arm of the Persian soldier who was about to split Alexander's skull open. Years later, at a drunken banquet in Samarkand, an argument broke out. Cleitus, enraged by Alexander's adoption of Persian customs, his claims to divinity, his tendency to take credit from the soldiers who had bled for him, finally said what everyone was thinking. He told Alexander, "It was this cowardice that saved you, and it was Macedonian blood that made you great, not Zeus." Alexander grabbed a spear from one of his guards and killed him. Then he stood there, looking at what he had done, and tried to turn the weapon on himself. His bodyguards wrestled it away. He locked himself in his room for days. He refused food. He called Cleitus's name aloud in the dark. Arrian's verdict is precise. Alexander had shown himself to be the slave of two vices, anger and drunkenness. The burning of Persepolis, the death march through the Gedrosian desert, where Alexander chose a route specifically because Cyrus the Great had failed to cross it, wanting to beat him, and may have lost as many as 3 in 4 of his people to thirst, starvation, and disease in the attempt. The arrow through his own lung at the Mallian Wall, a leap with no strategy, no plan, just pure Pothos dressed up as courage. Every one of these is the same trait, the same fire, and it was consuming everything around it. When his companion Hephaestion died of a fever in Ecbatana, Alexander's grief, in Plutarch's words, knew no bounds. He lay on the body weeping for hours. He refused food for 2 days. He sheared the manes of every horse in the army. He had the attending physician executed. He cut his own hair the way Achilles had cut his for Patroclus. He petitioned the oracle at Siwa to have Hephaestion worshipped as a god. And then, because Achilles had slaughtered captives at Patroclus's funeral pyre, Alexander did the same, ordering the massacre of an entire neighboring people as an offering to Hephaestion's shade. The madness and the grief were indistinguishable by now. The philosophers saw it clearly. When Alexander, at the height of his power, master of the known world, found the Cynic philosopher Diogenes sunbathing in the street, he asked, "Is there anything I can do for you?" Diogenes said, "Yes, stand out of my sunlight." Alexander told his laughing entourage, "If I were not Alexander, I would wish to be Diogenes." Seneca wrote about Alexander by name, and he was not kind. He called him altogether the slave of glory, and from his boyhood a desolator of nations. He said Alexander was hounded into misfortune and dispatched to unknown countries by a mad desire to lay waste other men's territory. He pointed to Diogenes, penniless, homeless, and said that man was more powerful than Alexander. Because what Diogenes refused to receive was more than Alexander was ever able to give. Marcus Aurelius returned to Alexander again and again in his private journals, the Meditations, as his go-to example of what happens when ambition is never turned inward. His line is the one that stops you cold. Alexander the Great and his mule driver both died, and the same thing happened to both. And then there is the real story behind the famous quote, the one that is almost always told wrong. You have probably heard, "Alexander wept, for there were no more worlds to conquer." That line does not come from any ancient source. It was invented centuries later. The real story from Plutarch is stranger and far more honest. Hearing a philosopher argue that there are infinite worlds in the universe, Alexander began to weep. When someone asked why, he said, "Is it not a matter for tears that when the number of worlds is infinite, I have not yet conquered even one?" That is Pothos from the inside. That is a man standing at the peak of everything any human being had ever achieved, and feeling only the gap between what he had and what he could not stop wanting. He died in Babylon on June 10th, 323 BC. Fever. 12 days. He was 32 years old. His body reportedly showed no decay for days afterward. His followers said it was proof of his divinity. Historians think it may mean he was still alive, just paralyzed, when they declared him dead. When his generals asked to whom he left his empire, Alexander reportedly said, "To the strongest." They tore it to pieces within a generation. The boy who turned the horse toward the sun so it could not see its shadow, the man who spent his whole life doing the same thing, died having never stopped running, still planning new wars, still chasing a horizon that infinite worlds could not have satisfied. Seneca's question is the one to carry out of this video. What is the point of conquering the world if you are conquered by the desire to conquer it? The madness made him unstoppable. But a thing that cannot stop will, eventually, destroy itself. Alexander the Great and his mule driver ended in the same dust. If this video made you think, subscribe. We go deep on history, philosophy, and the people who shape the world every single week. It's free, and it means everything for a channel like ours. See you in the next one.